There's no easy way to get around this. I don't like this episode. I really don't like this episode. But I feel like I'm in the cloud again. For those of you who remember, back in Season 1, there was an episode called The Cloud, which had a ridiculous and stupid plot and a ridiculous and stupid premise, and really good acting and directing. It was weird. I could basically summarize that as this episode. Here's your rumination. Good directing, good acting, terrible plot, terrible premise. But we have to add one other one, and that is terrible lines, terrible writing. This is some of the worst dialogue I've seen written in a very long time. It's no surprise Lisa Klink had to go and actually rewrite this several times, and she said it was one of the hardest scripts she's ever written. And I genuinely mean no offense by this, but it does show. This script struggles with its own dialogue. So as you guys probably know, I tend to do these little rehearsals in my head before I sit down and actually record anything. Voyager, Mega Man, videos, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I had this whole speech that I was working on, and I have decided after listening to myself talk about it for a while to eject it entirely. And the irony is the reasons why I'm ejecting it I can't really discuss because of the reasons I ejected it. It's a nice little catch-22 reason. Suffice it to say, I'm not going to get into the whole science versus religion debate. Sorry, you're going to have to look somewhere else for that. I'm sure you can find somewhere else in order to get that kind of a discussion from somebody, because it ain't coming from here. However, what I will say is that in base concept, this episode does have an interesting premise. Captain Janeway, a science officer whose entire career has been built on being on top of things, knowing fully what's going on, kind of almost a micromanaging control freak kind of a person, but not to those extremes. I'm just using those as descriptors to simplify her. Someone who wants to be in control of her universe and wants to know exactly how everything functions within that universe. Right? This sounds like Janeway? Yes? No? And then this individual, this character, basically runs an entire episode by herself trying to figure out a particular puzzle that she can't explain. Now that sounds like a cool premise, right? Right? Everyone agree? Yeah? Okay. Let me explain where it went wrong. It's really simple. I'm going to talk about it more, of course, because that's my job. The premise that I just explained to you is the original premise. The premise that we have in the actual episode is the scientist Janeway can't scientifically explain the religious happenings that are occurring around here, so the scientist must use scientific method to religiously explain the religious experiences. And am I emphasizing this sufficiently enough? The problem is the rewrite. Well, okay, I already just emphasized the big problem. Let's go ahead and talk about. Let's get some good stuff out of the way. For those of you who do not know, this is Robert McNeil's very first. Robert Duncan McNeil? Very first episode he directed. It was actually produced for Season 2, so this was done a little bit ago, relatively speaking. Also kind of explains why this episode's kind of crap, but I'm moving along. The point is, excuse me, there's this funny story about it. He was pretty much called up with absolutely no warning and no advance notice to come and direct this episode. It's just, all right, it's your turn on the chopping block, let's go! For those of you who don't know, tiny insight into Star Trek politics, one of the provisos that goes into the agreements, the contracts that most of the main cast members of Star Trek shows get is they get to direct. They get to dip their toes into the directing pool and try out their hand at directing. I say it's in the contract, but that's actually not 100% true. It's not actually written in stone. It's just something that they've been doing. They've been doing this since forever. TNG was really big on this. They also got really, well, like I said, political about it because there were some little office politics shuffling games going around, and in some cases some people would make a huge stink if they were supposed to direct, the next episode, for example, but they wanted this other person to direct this episode, so they'll let you direct the next episode, It's a mess in its own right. But on paper, I agree with it, because the point is, the idea is, the people who are familiar with the cast and crew are then working with the cast and crew. And it's one of the reasons we get some incredible directors. Jonathan Frakes and LeVar Burton both being excellent examples. Both of those people are amazing directors and have done some incredible work with that. So, you know, it's very likely they wouldn't have gotten that chance to discover that talent within themselves if not for that system. So don't mistake me for bashing it. It's a system. It's got flaws. It's got upsides. Point is, McNeil was up on the rotation. So he was like, oh, yes, okay, I'll direct. So no preparation, no work time, done over the weekend. Amazing job. And I could go through the episode and give you a point-by-point play, but it would get very boring very quickly. Watch the episode and watch the subtlety of his directing. He doesn't try to do anything. He doesn't make most of the more common mistakes from a first-time director. Sweeping motions with the camera, trying to do new and interesting things with how the scenes are blocked, trying to shove too much information with regards to what's on screen and in given one scene. He doesn't do any of those fairly rookie mistakes. Instead, the whole episode is shot very simply, but very clearly. And he always does it in a way that accents the scene. And I really feel like he did a really good job of it. I just wanted to give lots of praise to McNeil for his very first directing performance. Speaking of which, I want to give lots of praise to Mulgrew as well. I hate this episode. It's just bleh. And I'll talk about more why in a bit. But Mulgrew is not one of those reasons. She does a really phenomenal job. She pretty much holds this episode up on her shoulders because she has about 70% of the screen time more or less dedicated to her. Occasionally she'll have a guest star or two, but for the most part this is a Janeway episode fully and concretely. She does a very good job of it. She definitely handles her own. We get the impressions and feelings from her that the script fails at. It's actually funny. After I'd watched one particular scene, I'll talk about this in a moment, I was doing this, I was like, oh my god. And I was like, okay. I know the intent of the scene, so I actually rewound the episode, muted it, and rewatched it in mute. And the gestures that Mulgrew does and the way she's expressing herself, and again, this is complimentary both to her and to her director, it's a really good performance. And it was surprisingly more well done. And it's just, wow, if only they could fix that script. So yeah, I'm out of good things to say about this episode. There are three major problems with this script. The first is the false dichotomy of science versus religion. Now, again, I'm not getting into that debate. I'm not getting into that whole topic. But I personally have always felt the idea that science versus religion is kind of stupid. It's just my opinion. I don't think that versus needs to be there at all. I don't get that. I never have and probably never will. Just my opinion. But then this episode manages to screw even that up, because what we see, really pay attention, really analyze this episode like I do. Just hop into my brain. Oh god, get out. Okay, now that you're not in my brain, observe my brain. No, you don't want to do that either. Watch the episode carefully, and you will see what they portray as science is more like science. In other words, it's technobabble. They even admit this in the behind-the-scenes stuff in several interviews. It's just the entire point of the episode was to have something that couldn't be explained by technobabble. Technobabble, as we've discussed before, and one of the biggest problems with it, is not science. Technobabble is by definition nonsense. That is basically magic guised up to look like science. And the entire episode portrays this as, the scientific method is failing. No, it isn't. And science is not what is failing. Oh my god. It's so blatant. And then they screw up the other side. Because then they try to make it look like it's, versus faith or versus religion. Except it isn't. I'm going to go ahead and say one thing really quick here. Seriously and honestly. Faith, believing, these kind of... I'm going to exclude religion from this list, because that's actually a different definition. But faith and believing are things that you hold true in your uttermost core. These are the things that are effectively the foundation of your existence. They don't have to be spiritual in nature. They don't have to be religious in nature. These are the things that make up the very core foundation that is you. Okay? These deep core tenets do not get explained away by someone saying, just believe. Just go with it. That is New Age crap. Now, granted, we're a little past the New Age movement, thank God, but it was pretty strong when this episode came out. That is New Age nonsense. It is actually literally technobabble, just in a different guise. It's the idea of just kind of make it happen and it'll happen. Just believe, man, There is no actual religious spirituality, faith, or believing in this. It's just oh God, I'm actually failing at explaining because it's so stupid. I get the intent, but you're failing at it badly. And I admit I might be pulling a bit of a technically on this one, but the problem is the entire episode hinges on this. So you're asking me to accept a premise which I don't agree with to begin with, but okay, fine. So we move past that hurdle, and then you're asking me to accept that this is nonsense versus other nonsense. I'm not with you on this. And then we get to the really big problem. All of this, up to this point, in all honesty, thanks to the performance, thanks to the directing, I probably could have bought if not for one huge problem. The script is just bad. I actually mentioned, just last episode actually, I believe, with Remember, one of the biggest things I will tell aspiring writers or people who come to me for advice in writing, take your time, right? Get to the point in your own there is a second most common piece of advice I give, and that is be subtle. Or, more accurately, do not overemphasize. The more you overemphasize, the more crass your writing comes across as, and the more crude. And especially when it's spoken, like, within a television show. And when they listen to the lines, listen to the dialogue. There are so many points at which the lines feel awkward, feel ham-fisted, trying to force the point, literally, I could picture someone in the background with a freaking neon sign saying, "This is the point," in each of these scenes, and it's. I would have liked that more than the way they did this. Oh my God! Okay, I mentioned there was a scene in particular I was going to talk about. The scene I rewound and watched again. Surely you can give me some scientific data in order to work on this. I'm afraid that no, the government leaves the religion alone, and the religion leaves the government alone. Okay, that's acceptable. But then she immediately lunges and says, "And if you can't assist me in any way, blah blah blah." I'm sorry. I wish I could quote this word for it, but just watch the scene. They keep shoving words in there that don't belong, and the entire sentence structure is literally wrong. It's not grammatically incorrect, but it is wrong. That is not how people talk. And they're constantly trying to shove in just poor word choice, and they reuse words a lot, too. That's another common flaw in writing. That's why thesauruses exist. And the amount of times they would slip the word science or scientific into the dialogue, you could have made a drinking game out of it, for God's sakes. And so the whole time I'm just like, what are you doing? Between the false premise, between the bad execution of the premise, I hate this episode. It was actually a chore sitting down and watching through this episode. I really should have actually made a note, done the drinking game thing, just drink. Get a Canada Dry here. I'd be through 3 Canada Dries by the time I actually finished the episode. It was ridiculous. Now, believe it or not, that's actually all the notes I have. But some of you may or may not have noticed that there's one little featurette as part of my Voyager thing that I haven't done in a while. And part of the reason for that is because, honestly, thanks to my workload and thanks to the weight of certain things and this time of year, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Point being, I just didn't feel motivated to do it. I didn't feel motivated to actually sit down and do my alternate writings of these episodes. It's also worth noting that Remember was an episode I actually, kind of liked. And I kind of liked The Swarm, and I mentioned how I would change that, and I kind of liked The Shoot, and so forth and so on. Sacred Ground I can't stand, so I'm going to force myself here to rewrite this episode under my own limitations, because Sacred Ground is one of those episodes that would be ejected in its entirely in the Imperium, and indeed was ejected entirely in the favor of an episode that actually had something to do with the story that was happening at the time. So, within my limitations here, have to look at this episode, have to look at the premise. Now, the premise, as I already mentioned, is not religion versus science. The premise is scientific captain finds something she can't explain, tries to solve it. That is something I can work with. Here's what I would do. First of all, I would bring Kess into more of a larger role in this episode. Have the situation be set up more or less the same, except write it better so it doesn't literally look like they were just stumbling through the Smithsonian and walked into some mines that happen to be laying around the Declaration of Independence. Yes, I know that's not where this declaration is. Just bear with me, okay? The whole thing was treated stupidly. It was like something out of a cartoon. Oh, I wonder what's down this corridor. Oh, I'm dead. So treat that a little bit better. I'm not going to go into specifics because that would take too long. But the point is, have Kess encounter, have Kess and Neelix be wandering the area, and have Kess be called by something. Have her hear something with her psychoflexus powers, right? End up going in that direction, and this energy field goes off. Which she ends up going in a way down a way she isn't supposed to, and there's markings, and like, let's say there's even a door, but the door is left ajar because one of the monks just went through it. I know I said wouldn't go into specifics, but screw you, I want to actually write this. So she goes through, slips through. Neelix is like, God, Kess, what are you doing? And of course she goes through, and she gets knocked out, and you know, she's dead. Oh my God, she's not, of course, dead. They beam her up. They start trying to figure out what's going on. They can't figure out what's going on, blah, 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 blah. They try to appeal to the government. The government gives the line. It was the only line in the entire episode I really liked. We have had a long-standing agreement with the religious sect. We don't interfere with them, and they don't interfere with us, and that has worked very well for us. I like that line, because that one line speaks volumes about their culture by itself. Really, it does. And the idea of actual secular, or not secular, but actual segregation of church and state is interesting, and it also might kind of leave some hints and thoughts for anybody who cares to theorize about it that maybe they aren't actually as segregated as they think. You know, no need to flesh that out. Just let the audience figure that out. But that line stays. So finally, it gets to the point where Janeway, you know, agrees to basically act as the parental unit, the guardian of Kess, in order to enter the monastery and try to figure out what's going on. And so far, you'll notice this is basically the same episode. The big difference comes from the fact that, first of all, I wouldn't write the script like a 3-year-old. I bash my own writing skills constantly, but I'm a better writer than this. Sorry. So wouldn't write the script like a 3-year-old. But I would also have the situation unfold so that Janeway is trying to figure this thing out, and she's going through there, and I would have her be nice, polite, kind. I would have to structure this out, so I cannot give you a direct example, but picture the next few scenes as she's learning more about what the monastery is doing, and what is expected of her, and what is expected of the people in order to maintain their connection with the spirits, blah, 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 blah. And it gets to the end, and Janeway nods, and then she goes ahead and basically talks to whomever up top, and then gives them a more or less completely basic, mundane explanation for everything she just saw, and her belief as to how exactly that's going to affect the situation, and hopefully make it so that she can bring Kess back, right? So she goes and interacts with Kess. This is where Kess would kind of come more into her own, because at one point in time, Janeway would in fact be tested in this kind of trial situation and end up falling into a bit of a coma, right? I didn't mention this because there are so many other things to rag on, but one of the other things that bugged me about the episode is the gotcha. Voyager does this a little bit too often. And everything's bad, and then it's resolved. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. That's the gotcha, that dip right at the end there. They did this back in Projections, too. They do this whole thing, get this snake bite. It works. It totally fixes everything. No, it doesn't. She's dying. And then they have to go back and fix it again. It's just padding. So I would remove that. Make it to the point where the snake bite thing does work, or whatever. It doesn't have to be a snake bite. And she falls into the coma. And then she starts encountering Kess. And it turns out this entire time, Kess has actually been wandering these halls. You see where this is going. As one of the spirits. It turns out that what happens is, thanks to a unique combination of, I don't know, say the particular neuropatterns that individuals are have present within them when they enter this entire area. It doesn't have to be just like this one corridor, but you know, if they enter the entire region, this field interacts with them, separates their consciousness from their body, and then allows their consciousness to move within the area of this field. I would go very far out of my way to never actually explain if this is technological, or some kind of energy being, or some kind of spiritual thing, because that's not the point. And indeed, Janeway herself would try to determine it. Where's the thing that's projecting the field? And Kes says, I have no idea. I have not seen anything that seems to be projecting it. The point is the lack of explanation. Not everything can be explained. Star Trek has been about exploring the unknown since the original series. This is not a new concept. Sorry, I'm really upset. This freaking episode. So have then and that would happen relatively quickly, I think, and then have the third act pretty much solely be about trying to reconnect Kes's essence to her body. And it would be very strongly about Kes, about Janeway, the two of them talking, interacting, Kes sharing her thoughts on this, because Kes doesn't really have any faith or believing or anything like that, because that's not how the Ocampa really work, other than the caretaker. And she saw firsthand how a belief can turn into dogma. And I would want to see Kes's insights onto this matter, because she has that insight, because she has that mentality, personal experience of how a belief can be taken too far to be a bad thing. But at the same time herself is open-minded enough to accept the fact that she may literally just be a spirit at this point, a spirit energy or being, ghost, whatever. Use whatever term you want, because it doesn't matter. And that's my point and hers both. And then have the white, and there would be a thought process too in there somewhere of, talking to some of the other spirits that are walking around and saying, do you have any way of trying to get back? You want to get back? And some of them would say how they tried to get back several times and they couldn't. Some of them would say they like being here better than they did their previous lives, all that kind of a thing, right? And we would get the impression that the only way to actually undo this entire process is Kes herself has to effectively use her new status willingly to return to her body. And that's why she hasn't yet. Because the explorer in Kes, this would lead into things that happen later on in Season 3 as well. The explorer in Kes would want to explore this new lifestyle, this new concept, this new idea. And one thing I would never say out loud, but I would want to be something the audience would be thinking about, is the idea that Kes might want to live a life longer than 9 years. And that maybe she would actually want to remain in this form, specifically because of the fact that she could then enjoy a longer life. And that doubt and that questioning would be in there, and then it would reach the point where Janeway herself would tell her honestly and truthfully that, Kes, I can't order you to do this, I can't make you do this, this is your choice. And, Kes would debate it and finally decide to return, because, we want her back on the show. And, but I would make this a very strong character development episode for both Janeway and Kes. The idea of Janeway really showing off her scientific side. And I don't mean that as the science versus religion. I mean the orderly, diagnosed, I know what's happening and I know why it's happening. That aspect of her personality I would have very strong. There would be no real resolution for Janeway in my version of this episode. It would just be her mindset being shaken by this and her approach to how she's going to deal with this now that she no longer can fall back on what she always has. Whereas Kes would grow very significantly in this episode and realize not only that she has to enjoy every moment even more so, having now had a glimpse of exactly what could happen both when she dies and when she lives longer, but also having an understanding of how blessed she is to have the crew of Voyager at her back. Because, let's be honest, aside from the gimmick of the week, being on Voyager is effectively paradise, especially compared to most of the civilizations and lives they've encountered thus far, and especially compared to the life that the Ocampa lived, either under or otherwise of the Kazon. So that's how I would have done the episode. Sorry for the long ramble there. I hope you enjoyed, because I did. And next we're talking about some episodes I really like. Woo! And you probably hate me for that, and that's okay. I will endure your hatred. So see you next time, guys.